Hey everybody, how are you? It's Schwartzberg here. We're learning the Sefer Shomer Emunim. We're in the middle of Perek. In the last class, we started Perek. We discussed the mitzvah Bitachon is learned out from from having the midah of Temimus, which we loosely translated as simplicity, being complete. And there's a Malchus Rishonim about the mitzvah being tamim, if that's actually one of the mitzvahs of the Taryag mitzvahs, or it's rather a prerequisite. It's like a hakdama to the Torah, a hakdama to all the Taryag mitzvahs, but it's not actually included. But regardless, we see that in order to have bitachon, one has to have temimus. Now we're going to continue that in order to have a shleimus in bitachon and having trust in Hashem, you have to have a third partner, and that is Emunah. Let's continue the paragraph that starts with da. V'da ki ha-Torah tziva lanu shloisha mitzvos hayikarim. The Torah commands us 3 mitzvos, precious mitzvos. Shehema, they are mitzvos emunah, roish l'chol ha-mitzvos. The mitzvah of emunah, of believing that there's Hashem, which is the roish of all mitzvos. Shu anoichi Hashem lakecha, I am Hashem, says Hashem. Which is brought down in the Chumash Shemais. Mitzvahs emes shehu temimus, and the mitzvah of emes, which is temimus, as it says in Chumash Devarim, tamim tia im Hashem lakecha, you should be tamim with Hashem. And as it's also brought down in Chumash Bereshis, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar Avram, his halech lefonai v'yeitamim, Hashem says to Avram Avinu, walk before me and be tamim. V'nichlal boy mitzvahs habitachon, and bitachon is included in this, even though he's not quoting a pasuk, because as we said in the last class, bitachon is more hinted out in Kabbalah, in Nevi'im Ksuvim, but he says it's included, and therefore it's a third mitzvah. Ushloshten elu ha-mitzvahs tluyim u'mekusharim zeh b'zeh. These 3 mitzvahs are connected and tied to each other. V'hinei, Emunah yedua shu shoyish l'chol hashirashim. Emunah is the root of all roots. K'moshe Kosav, as it's written in Shir Hashirim, to Shiri Meroish, look from the peak Amona of Amona. He's learning this pasuk as, I guess, don't read it literally Amona, but rather Emunah. That Emunah is the top of all mitzvahs. Shu roish l'chol mitzvahs. Therefore, le'imona bal halachas ud'ine mitzvahs Emunah b'chlal taryag. And therefore, the Bahag does not learn the mitzvah of Emunah as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. Now, just a side note, don't get mixed up what we learned in the last class, where we discussed the mitzvah being tamim. Over there, the Bahag did include tamim as one of the mitzvahs. Now we're talking about Emunah. So again, and therefore, the Bahag did not teach the mitzvah of Emunah as being one of the Taryag mitzvahs. Ramban himlitz ba'adoi b'sefer mitzvos, and the Ramban on his side, v'zeh l'shoinei sham of the Ramban. The Ramban writes, "V'im kol zeh re'isi lebal halachis shalei mono eisa mitzvah shal neicha Hashem lakecha b'chlal taryag." He did not include the mitzvah of neicha Hashem lakecha as one of the taryag mitzvahs. V'hanira midaita shal bal halachis she'ein minyan taryag mitzvahs ela gezeiroisa v'yisale shegazer leinu lasois le'mananu shloi nasa. Because Taryag mitzvahs are the gzeiros, are the decrees of Hashem, what we should do and what we should not do. Aval Emunah b'mitziusa yis'ale shaydiya oisay leinu b'oisay sevloifsim megila shchin leinu but Emunah, which is so elevated, which was brought to us through miracles and signs like Yitzias Mitzrayim, and when Hashem revealed His Shechina to us, who ikara asher shimeni nolda mitzvahs, from that source was born the mitzvahs. Lo yemona b'cheshboina. So that Emunah cannot be included as one of the gezeiros, one of the 613 mitzvahs. Who maimer hachachamim, as is brought down in the Mechilta, gizor aleinu, which he explains. Also, Kabbalas hamalchus inyan b'fnei atzmai. First, the people, right? They have a king. First is the Malchus. After there's a king, then he gives the decrees, then he gives the rules. So first you have Emunah, and only then you have Taryag mitzvahs. So Emunah is a prerequisite, it's a hakdama to Torah. Harei Torah miloshoinei haTorah Ki mitzvos Emunah hu shorish l'chol hashirashim shemenu mistafin kol mitzvos haTorah. So what we learn from the Ramban and from the Bahag is that Emunah is the root of all roots. From there, it branches off to all the mitzvahs in the Torah. Ayin b'Sefer HaKadosh Tolos Yaakov Yosef, which is Ibn Nachman Hardenker. Pilpul Aruch al pi darchei avoda. Usually you have pilpul and lumdis. Rashi will give a shir koli and pilpul and lumdis. Over here, it's a pilpul al pi darchei avoda. And you see this thing in Emunah. Hamavor Sham Das HaRambam Shemona Mitzvahs Emunah Ben Taryag. Why the Rambam does include Emunah as one of the mitzvahs? Das Balalochas Ramban Shoimed B'tzidu Shleimono Yisataryag. And why the Bahag and the Ramban does not include Emunah as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. Ayin Sham. He continues with the Sefer Emunah Bitachon Ramban Zal. The Ramban writes in the Sefer Emunah Bitachon that Emunah Bitachon Heim Shnei Inyanim She'echad Tzarech Lechaveir Ve'in Chaveir Tzarech Eloi, where one needs the next, but the next doesn't need the first one. She'emunah Kaidemes Bitachon Umiskayemes B'Leiv HaMaimin Afa Pi She'ena Bitachon Imo. Because you can have Emunah, and Emunah comes first, even though there's no Bitachon. Then it's richa lebikiyuma. You don't need bitachon. Well, lefikach einay meira love. Aval habitachon hu meira leha. But bitachon, on the other hand, is meira on Emunah. She efshalei liyoyis kaidam azeh, because you can't have bitachon without Emunah. V'loy lihiskayim baladeh. Bitachon cannot exist. Trust cannot exist without Emunah. And I'll explain in just a few seconds. Anyone that has trust, that has bitachon, is called a believer. But every believer is not called one that trusts. And he explains, Emunah is like a tree. And bitachon is like a fruit. A fruit is a sign that it was a tree. Or a bush that gave birth to this fruit, that grew this fruit. But a tree or a bush is not a sign for a fruit. Why? You can have a tree and a bush that doesn't grow fruits. But the opposite, you don't have a fruit without an ilan or esav. What comes out, Emunah is the root, and bitachon is the fruit. Ve'heim train rain, they're like two friends, that don't separate. And it's brought down in the Zohar HaKadosh. And before I go on, till now we explain that bitachon and Emunah are tied to each other. Now he's going to bring down from the Zohar that also Temimus is tied to Emunah. So he says, "V'zeh l'shoina of the Zohar in Parashas Balak." Emunah. I'm just going to explain enough so you know what's going on, because I don't want this to turn into a Kabbalah share. But within the Zohar explains that Emunah, that when is Malchus, which is din, right? You have a king that judges. When is Malchus called Emunah? The shaita deschaba ba'emes, when you bring in emes, as we explained in the last class, emes is teferes, which is mashpia on the din, again, which is mashpia on the Malchus, and it brings simcha, because when you have teferes, emes, mixed into the pile with Malchus, with din, that brings lechedva, that brings simcha. The whole anpin, and all the faces of the spheres, nihir and light up. Kedein ikri Emunah, and then Malchus is called Emunah. V'is vachanusa lekoila, and then you have forgiveness on all aveiros for all of Klal Yisrael. V'chol nishmasin solkin, and another timing that you have that Malchus is called Emunah is v'chol nishmasin solkin, when the neshamas leave people's bodies, right, at night when you go to sleep, and it goes up to Hashem, it goes up to the Malchus. People are liable for whatever they did wrong that day, and they should get punished. The kevan to be in Salkin, but since his neshama is deposited by the Malchus, by Hashem, Adar loin barachame, Hashem returns the neshama with rachmanis. He forgives the person. V'chasalayu. Ukadein ikri emunah, and then the Malchus is called Emunah. V'leis emunah b'lei emes, but you don't have Emunah without emes. Ad kan l'shaynai harei ki emunah tolei b'midas emes. Without going too deep into this, you see from the Zohar that one can only have Emunah with the midah of emes, which is Temimus. And now the Shomer Emunim brings everything together. Bitachon is dependent on the mitzvah of Emunah, which is like the fruit, which is dependent on the tree. That when you have a tree, even if the fruit falls off, the tree then goes ahead and grows another fruit. The fruit, only as long as it's still attached to the tree, does it have a shmira. Once the fruit falls off the tree, nimos miskalkel gets ruined. Only when do you have bitachon, the maila bitachon, that's when it's attached to the tree, which is emunah. One can only have a shleimus in bitachon if he has all three, if he has emunah, Temimus, and Bitachon. Therefore, the klal rishon to acquiring Bitachon is only if he's mechazik in Emunah. And the shleimus in Emunah can only be if it's acquired b'darchei Temimus.